He wasn't mine. He never was. But that didn't stop me from opening the door again. I never intended for it to escalate to that extent. He reached out, his hand hovering near the hem of my shirt when I murmured, "He's upstairs." Yet I did not intervene. I ought to have. The house groaned, as if the very walls were aware of the injustice unfolding within. My husband lay 2 floors above us, completely oblivious to everything around him. And there I found myself, leaning against the fridge, caught in a moment of conflicted emotions as another man explored the curve of my waist as if it were his to claim. It began without any physical contact. It began with fleeting looks. Those taken, those hushed, the sort that remain for a moment too extended. Everyone claims to recognize the moment when something starts. Yet the reality is, awareness comes only when it's already too late to intervene. He was no unfamiliar face. He would often take to the task of mowing the lawn. He began to repair various items. A storage unit, the light on the porch, an unassuming faucet that required no replacement whatsoever. One evening, my husband extended an invitation for him to join us for a beer. It was the first moment I became aware of the way he gazed at me as I reached for a wine glass. How his gaze lingered just a moment too long. Neither did mine. Initially, I reassured myself that it posed no threat. I felt isolated, not impulsive. Yet, loneliness is elusive. It takes without asking. It manifests in the way you remain in the kitchen, even when hunger is absent. The manner in which you choose to dress, perhaps just to catch someone's eye. The flutter of your heart as someone besides your husband finds your jokes amusing. He was also younger. Not by a wide margin, yet sufficient to evoke the sensation of a renewed opportunity. A scenario that had taken shape and strolled into my home, clad in faded denim and bearing the marks of hard work. That night, sleep eluded me. I reclined next to my husband, gazing at the ceiling, contemplating how it would feel if that laughter of his resonated from right beside me instead. I did not experience love. I wasn't foolish either. Yet, I found myself conjuring thoughts that caused me to bite my lip in the shadows. I distanced myself from my husband's warmth, not out of bitterness, but because it stirred no feelings within me. The following morning, I discovered a note resting on the counter. The light in the hallways flickers. This week I can come and fix it. Simply a message. No signature provided. No smiling face. A simple, gentle recommendation. The paper carried a subtle scent of cedar, mingling with an elusive hint of cologne or perhaps sawdust. Perhaps a sense of eager expectation. I carefully folded the note in half and tucked it away beneath a magazine. I chose not to share it with my husband. I cleaned the dishes. I cleaned the floor 2 times. I gazed at my reflection in the hallway mirror, lingering longer than necessary, pondering whether I appeared changed, questioning if I resembled someone on the verge of deceit. And when I messaged him that night, "He'll be gone by tomorrow afternoon." The initial layer of guilt clung to me as if it were a heavy mist. My thumbs lingered for a moment before I pressed send. Yet there was no quaking, no hesitation. It was that peculiar sensation, akin to the feeling of bare feet on a frigid tile surface, an instinctive awareness that something was on the verge of shattering. I found myself unable to sleep. I focused on the clock instead. I tallied the intervals of silence amid my husband's rhythmic snores. As the sun ascended, casting gentle golden hues upon the blinds, I realized that my choice had been made in the quiet of the previous night. Not using my fingers. Through my quietude. He made his entrance at precisely 2:14 in the afternoon. I observed the digital clock shift from 2.13 to 2.14 as if it held significance, as if there remained a fleeting moment to feign ignorance about my actions. I had already cleaned the kitchen counters twice, spritzed perfume behind my knees, and slipped into something casual, yet snug enough. As I turned the handle and pushed the door ajar, my hands trembled, yet my smile remained steadfast. "Hey," he said. Simply that. Single term. Yet his gaze lingered on me, filled with a subtle yearning, as if he had envisioned this moment more than once before. The hallway lights continued to flicker as I stepped aside. "I will examine it." He never inquired about the duration of my husband's absence. He was already aware. I guided him through the corridor and lingered at the threshold, feeling like a specter in my own home. He twisted the fixture free with deliberate slowness, engaging in casual chatter about wiring and humidity, yet my mind wandered elsewhere. I observed how his shirt rose subtly as he extended his arm, the manner in which his shoulder blades moved beneath the cotton fabric, the gentle creak of the step-stool beneath his weight. The moment held no obvious signs. No boundaries breached. Only pressure. Stress. There exists a vibrant essence in the void that separates us. He completed the test of the switch swiftly, the click resonating more loudly than expected. The light flickered briefly before settling into a steady glow. "It's done," he declared. "Thank you." Yet, neither of us made a single move. I ought to have provided him with water, or bid farewell, or turned away. Yet my feet remained firmly rooted. Yet he remained. Instead, he descended while gripping the screwdriver, his breath slightly quickened. His arm lightly grazed against mine. It might have been an unfortunate mishap. It ought to have been. "Are you all right?" he inquired, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave a slight nod. He reached up with deliberate slowness, his touch gentle, as he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. My breath hitched, not due to the contact, but rather the sensation of anticipation it evoked, as if we had practiced this in our fantasies. "We shouldn't," I whispered. "I understand." He made no attempt to kiss me. Not at that time. He remained motionless, his gaze fixed on me, patiently awaiting a response, allowing me to make the choice. The waiting was what shattered me, because a part of me yearned for him to seize the reins, to be the one who shattered it all, sparing myself the burden of choice. Yet he chose not to. He remained motionless. It was I who took the step forward. The kiss was not hurried. The pace was languid, uncertain, frightening in its gentleness. He leaned in slowly, as if he had pondered this moment for far too long. My hands brushed against his chest before I fully comprehended my actions. His heart raced with fervor. So was mine. A dog from a neighboring house barked in the distance. The lawnmower roared to life. In my kitchen, I found myself speaking to a man who was not my husband. His hand moved toward my waist, then paused, uncertain. I drew him nearer. The counter met my back with a gentle thud. There remained a moment to intervene. There remains an opportunity to acknowledge that this was an error. Yet I refrained. He reached toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. Not as if he had any claim over me, as if he were peeling away layers from something delicate. My breath caught in my throat as his hand brushed close to me, a near touch that lingered. "He's upstairs," I whispered once more, as though uttering it would somehow solidify the truth. "I understand," he murmured. Yet he persisted. I chose not to push him away. It's peculiar what memories surface in times like those. Not the remorse. Not even the warmth. Yet the specifics lingered, his breath brushing against my collarbone, the subtle aroma of sawdust clinging to his shirt, the way sunlight danced in the strands of his hair as he drew closer. We lingered in the moment, the atmosphere calm and contemplative. It lacked desperation. The atmosphere was serene, intent, as if we were attempting to imprint the outline of what we were on the verge of destroying. He reached out with gentle care, fingers near my ribs, his thumbs moving softly. It was a touch that suggested more than words could ever say. I felt a part of me resurfacing long dormant. He leaned in once more, and I didn't pull away. I felt seen, appreciated in a way I hadn't in a long time. Not for dinner plans or laundry or schedules, but for the way I stood, breathed, and occupied space. His hand moved through my hair, a touch that caught me off guard. I sensed myself descending into a forgotten version of myself, the girl who would shut her eyes and envision peril, who once held the belief that touch could convey more than mere words. In my kitchen, she found her spark once more, entwined with a man who was never mine, while the one who truly was lay 2 floors above, unaware of the unfolding scene. We crossed boundaries we hadn't before, stopping just short of no return. He gazed at me as if he desired to continue, as if he were capable, as if he truly would. Yet a flicker danced behind his eyes, perhaps restraint, perhaps fear, or the harsh reverberation of consequences. He assisted me down with care, as if I were something fragile, and I was, though not in the manner he imagined. I remained silent. I was unable to. Words could have brought it to life. I averted my gaze, smoothed my shirt, and fixed my eyes on the kitchen window as if nothing had transpired. I could sense him behind me, his breath labored, fingers threading through his hair, followed by soft footsteps fading away, and at last, the sound of the door clicking shut as he slipped out without a word of farewell. I remained still. It has been quite a while. I stood frozen, heart racing, the lingering taste of him on my lips, contemplating the transformation I had just undergone. Upstairs, the house held its silence, my husband deep in slumber, the bed still infused with his warmth, the very man to whom I had vowed eternity. Yet, all that occupied my mind was the realization that I had crossed a boundary today, and strangely, I felt no remorse. Not at this moment. That evening, I rested next to my husband in the shadows, feigning that the heaviness upon my heart was merely slumber. His breathing remained even, lips parted as usual, one arm resting on my hip as if it were second nature. He was completely unaware. He never inquired about my decision to shower twice that day, nor did he question my silence during dinner. He simply smiled at me as he always did, with a sense of ease, kindness, and constancy. Such a love is meant to be secure. I stood in the stairwell for longer than I should have, letting the warmth fade off my skin, willing myself to forget and failing. Perhaps that's the reason I felt so uneasy beneath the sheets, my body fresh, yet my skin still tingling in the spots he hadn't caressed in ages. I gazed up at the ceiling, attempting to focus solely on the sound of the fan. Not the recollection of another man's whisper against my skin. Not the sound I produced when his hand moved closer, as if it were meant to be. The subsequent days felt empty. I steered clear of mirrors. I folded laundry. My fingers recalling the way he once held my hips. I prepared the evening meal. I arranged the bed neatly. I even shared a kiss with my husband before heading off to work. Yet, it all seemed like a mere imitation, as if I were merely acting the part of another's spouse. I attempted to erase it from my memory. I attempted to regard it as a singular error. Yet, letting go proves challenging when desire knows your every move. He wasted no time. 3 days later, the next message arrived. Merely one term. Coffee. I gazed at it for what felt like an eternity. My thumb lingered in the air. My throat felt parched. I should have said no. Yet my fingers danced across the keys before my mind could intervene. This evening, once he has drifted off to sleep, I switched off the screen and cast the phone away, yet my heart was already pounding. Turning back was not an option. I opened the door once, and there he was, still standing there. On that night, the rain fell. Quiet. A gentle, persistent drizzle pattered against the bedroom window, serving as a subtle reminder. My husband lay there, softly snoring, one leg dangling precariously off the edge of the bed. I observed him for a brief instant. In slumber, he appeared more aged, gentler, and full of trust. Then I glided out from beneath the blanket, a specter moving silently down the hall, my bare feet whispering against the floor as I opened the door to the man who stood in the rain. Upon entering, he remained silent. Garments, wet locks, disheveled. He gazed at me with those familiar eyes, that same magnetic draw, and I welcomed him in just as I had before. He trailed behind me into the guest bathroom, a space devoid of windows, lacking creaky floorboards, filled only with tile, silence, and hidden truths. There was silence between us. Not even when his hand sought mine in the shadows and drew it to his heart. His shirt clung to his body, soaked through and revealing every contour. I grasped the hem and lifted it gently, as if it were a cherished relic. He allowed me to. Then he mirrored that action towards me. We moved as if we were seasoned in this, yet the reality of it all felt surreal. His fingers traced the contours of my back. My fingertips grazed a shoulder. The mirror quickly clouded, obscuring all but the feeling itself. The chill of the tile wall met my breath. His lips traced the curve of my neck. Each motion was silent, deliberate, and precise. Up until that moment, it seemed otherwise. Until I clutched the edge of the sink and he leaned into me from behind, I found myself crossing every line I believed I would never cross. Silence enveloped the scene. No one came to the door. Yet, that only intensified the peril, rendering it even more surreal. I held back my tears. I remained silent. I simply allowed it to unfold, experiencing both everything and nothing simultaneously. As it concluded, he was the first to take a step back. I stood before the mirror, hair untamed, lipstick vanished, eyes wide open. The woman gazing back at me was unrecognizable. She was radiant, disheveled, and full of life, and I loathed the depth of my longing for her. For 4 days, silence reigned between us. No texts, no looks exchanged across the street. He failed to stop by and inspect the porch light. I didn't come up with a fresh reason to meet him, yet he seemed to be omnipresent, within the chair he had occupied before. Amidst the lingering aroma of perspiration and timber, subtly present on the guest towel. In my own body, which had started to betray me, I would stop at red lights and find my thoughts drifting to the way his hand moved over mine, as if he already possessed the answer to an unasked question. In the stillness of the night, my husband embraced me, and I surrendered to his warmth. Yet my gaze remained fixed on the ceiling, as if it could crack open and consume me entirely. It was not love, I must clarify that. I didn't desire him in that eternal sort of manner. I desired him in the manner one craves for things that bring pain. The manner in which flames beckon your hand, inviting you to approach just within reach of their warmth. He brought to mind a feeling I had long buried, the sensation of being desired to such an extent that words became unnecessary. The stillness had a way of making your skin feel tender. And the most troubling aspect was that I had no desire to cease. I yearned to plunge deeper. I yearned to sense my own fading just a bit further. The subsequent occasion was not arranged. The hour had long since passed midnight. My husband rushed out to his brother's house for an unexpected emergency, departing with his overnight bag and a hasty kiss that barely registered amidst the chaos. I lingered in the doorway, observing his tail lights fade into the distance, and before I shut the door, I realized I had made my choice. Less than half an hour later, the knock echoed through the silence. Merely a pair of gentle taps. He lingered in a gray hoodie, his hands tucked into his pockets, his expression a mystery. I remained silent, merely widening the door's entrance. On this occasion, we refrained from visiting the kitchen or the bathroom. We ascended the narrow staircase with a quiet deliberation, stepping into the room that once served as my art studio, a space now forgotten as life swept me away, allowing dust to gather on my easel. The moonlight filtered through the skylight, casting a silvery glow over everything. I secured the door firmly after us. He removed his hoodie first. I removed my shirt next. Silence reigned supreme. "Are you certain about that?" He was certain already. I felt the same way. We never quite reached the couch. We found ourselves on the floor, encircled by paint-splattered drop cloths, inhaling the sharp scent of turpentine. His hands were more assured this time, devoid of hesitation. Mine were more daring as well, digging into his shoulder blades, encircling the back of his neck, drawing him in closer. Our lips met as if we had stepped over a boundary, indifferent to the lines others might draw. For a moment, he paused, his forehead pressed against mine, our breaths intertwining in the space between us. "You're trembling," he whispered. "I understand," I mentioned, keeping the voice down. "Please, continue without hesitation." That was the moment, the one I would revisit in my mind, when I voiced it aloud, when I made it evident that this was no longer merely an accident. His kiss deepened, and I felt my back curve in response. I pressed my teeth into my lip, stifling a sound that ought not to have escaped me. The chill of the floor went unnoticed by me. All I could sense was his body melding with mine, the cadence of our motions, the way we intertwined in that exhilaratingly swift, undeniably wrong, yet flawlessly right manner. As we lay entwined, gazing at the ceiling above, the wind whispered outside, the house creaked in its settling, and the pulse of my blood echoed in my ears. "Have we finished?" he inquired gently, avoiding my gaze. I remained silent, unsure of what silence truly signified for me now. I began to secure the doors with greater frequency, not out of fear of being discovered, but rather out of concern for how effortlessly I had ceased to care if I was. My husband observed the little details. The guest towel perpetually moist, the subtle aroma of aftershave lingering, yet distinctly different from his own. A receipt from the hardware store remained a mystery to me, yet he chose not to inquire. Perhaps he was not seeking the answer at all. That's the essence of marriages. We cease to examine closely when the reality could shatter what remains. Each time I allowed that man to re-enter my world, it felt as though I was shattering myself, bit by bit, as if my essence was slipping beyond my control. It transcended mere longing, and love felt distant. It was a craving, striking unexpectedly amidst the mundane tasks of folding laundry or waiting for water to boil for pasta. I recalled the way he gazed at me just before he drew near, the way his hand moved softly along my waistline as if he were etching warmth into his memory. I convinced myself it would cease when the guilt became unbearable, yet it persisted. The guilt didn't shout. It murmured softly, and I continued to turn down the dial. The most recent occurrence took place in the garage. My husband was upstairs tending to a headache. I mentioned to him that I had forgotten something in the car. I wonder if he sensed the reality in the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. The garage lay shrouded in shadows, illuminated solely by the flickering glow of the motion sensor perched above the shelves. I found myself in the driver's seat, the door slightly open, my heart racing and my hands chilled. He quietly settled into the passenger seat, offering no words. We didn't share a kiss. Instead, we locked eyes for an entire minute, the atmosphere heavy and suffocating. He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. There was no conversation between us. The gear shift pressed against my hip, my back collided with the seat, and his lips met mine. This time, it was a frantic rush, perilous and urgent. I let the moment happen. I allowed myself to be pulled into it as his hand traced familiar lines, guided by memory and impulse. The garage resonated gently with the whispers of breath, the rustle of fabric, and the rhythmic tap of my heel against the floor mat. I leaned my head back and clenched my knuckle between my teeth, stifling the sound that rose inside me. Not here, not now. When it concluded, he withdrew at a more languid pace than normal. He pressed his forehead to mine, eyes shut as if he longed to express something yet struggled to articulate it just right. I brushed my fingers across his chest for the final time. I didn't utter a farewell. I simply exited the car and made my way back upstairs. My husband lay in slumber. The air was infused with the scents of eucalyptus and shampoo. I slid beneath the sheets, my skin still tinged with the heat of betrayal. I averted my gaze from him and focused on the wall. That marked the final moment I laid eyes on him. The other one, the one who lingered in my thoughts like a storm I couldn't quite escape. He failed to call, and I refrained from texting. A change had occurred. Perhaps we both sensed we were teetering on the brink of something destined to crumble. Perhaps that was the intention from the start. Yet, even now, weeks later, I catch myself gazing out the window at night, contemplating whether he will come knocking again, and resenting the possibility that I might actually open the door if he does. It didn't conclude due to our weariness with one another. It concluded as the silence became more pronounced than our desire. I convinced myself it was for the better, that I would cease waking in the depths of night, reaching out for someone who is no longer present. Yet, his absence took on a form, long and warm, coiled like a secret I still kept hidden beneath my tongue. My husband has begun to smile more once again. Perhaps he assumed the distance within me had finally melted away. Perhaps he thought my unexpected warmth was love rather than guilt. I found myself kissing him more frequently, preparing his beloved dishes, and holding his hand on the couch as we watched movies that barely captured my interest. I assumed the role of one filled with gratitude, and perhaps I truly was, yet not for the reasons he believed. On certain nights, he visited my dreams, not the affair in its entirety, merely fragments of time shared. The way he inhaled softly against my skin, the way his hands lingered before brushing mine aside, as if seeking silent consent. In a dream, I urged him to go, and he complied. In another moment, I pleaded for him to remain, and he kissed me with such conviction that tears fell from my eyes as I slept. I would awaken, soaked in perspiration, the sheets ensnared around my legs, my chest empty with an indescribable feeling. I ceased to monitor my phone. I removed his number, only to retrieve it again from my recollection. I composed messages only to delete them. My body drifted through the days as if it had lost the ability to desire anything until that night when I encountered him once more. A friend's birthday had arrived. My husband and I received an invitation to a quaint dinner party at a beautifully renovated loft in the heart of downtown. I slipped into a backless dress that had remained untouched for years, not for him, but for myself, or perhaps for the lingering spirit of someone who once gazed at me as if I held significance. With wine in hand and laughter flowing, we strolled in, and then my eyes fell upon him. Across the room, sleeves of a button-down shirt rolled up, laughter erupted at something someone had said. He had not laid eyes on me yet. In that fleeting moment, I perceived it all, the depth of my longing for him, the bitterness of absence that gnawed at me, and how my skin still recalled the warmth of his breath in the hidden corners of my memory. He raised his gaze. Our gazes intertwined. I stood still, my body rigid. In an instant, everything came undone. My husband placed his hand on my back, gently steering me toward the hors d'oeuvres. I smiled as if nothing had broken. I chuckled at the appropriate moments, yet I sensed his gaze upon me. Whenever I stole a sideways glance, he was right there, merely a few feet apart, within reach if the walls vanished. We remained silent. There was no necessity for that. My heartbeat conveyed it all. As I stood in the hallway outside the bathroom, he moved past me, lingering just behind. Only we remained, accompanied by the soft murmur of a far-off stereo. He refrained from making contact, merely leaning in so near that I could sense the change in the atmosphere. "You look beautiful," he murmured gently. My heart raced, pounding in my throat. "This has lost its reality," I murmured. "It has always remained real," he responded. He turned and left. There I stood, hands trembling, breath caught, coming to terms with the truth that no amount of distance could ever diminish the longing within me for him. After that night, our words fell silent, not through language. Yet in the weeks that ensued, I bore him within me like a bruise nestled beneath my ribs, delicate and concealed, an indelible memory. I believed it would diminish. I believed that encountering him and then turning away would provide me with closure, a subtle triumph over whatever had blossomed between us. Yet, I found myself mistaken. The end had not yet arrived. Not within me. It resonated in the little details. The manner in which I tarried before the mirror. The manner in which I nibbled my lip when no eyes were upon me. I remained motionless in the hallway upon hearing a knock at the door, fully aware that it wasn't him. But sometimes, just sometimes when the wind howls at night, I swear I hear a knock. And I freeze, because I know, if I opened it again, I might never close it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Tales of Euphoria, and stay with us for more untold emotions.